Well, thank you, Paige, and hello, everyone. With reserve studies recently in the news, we felt it would be good to present a webinar on how boards can successfully work with their reserve studies, and the imagery of Quicksand came to mind. So as you heard, we've asked expert John Cligney to join us today, helping me share an important message about how you and your association, or the ones you manage, can use a reserve study to get successfully to the future. Well, this is the outline we'll be using for today's program, guiding you through an introduction, how to identify quicksand, getting out of quicksand, avoiding quicksand in the future, and then bringing it all together in a summary. Avoiding quicksand starts with knowing what we're talking about. Leading an association forward all the way to the future is a journey, and there is trouble along the way. Nothing you can do about that. So those big expenses are going to happen. They are not just possible or probable, they're inevitable. They're lurking, and they can scare you easily off the trail or capture you if you're not looking closely. So the board has the job of leading the association safely and successfully to the future. And the question is, will you get there safely, or will you get stuck in the quicksand along the way? And as we think about the journey, we have to, of course, talk about what does success look like? Well, success looks like having sufficient reserves to perform your reserve projects on time. And that means no expensive deferred maintenance, no special assessments, and maximized property values. Those are two real big economic incentives. So that kind of lays the groundwork for what we'll be talking about here today with quicksand. And now I'd like to transition to the next topic, identifying quicksand. I'd like to have John spend a few minutes leading us through this topic. With his years of experience, he certainly knows what to look for.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate it. It's wonderful to be sharing this time with you and your audience. There's a lot of different types of quicksand. And in my experience of managing community associations for years, we've run across all of these. And it's important for you to be able to reflect on what they are and see if there's any application just for your own boards to be aware of these different types of quicksand. So on the slide, you can see that there's hoarding reserves, there's depleting reserves, there's not collecting or preparing for reserves, there's apathy, being unsure when to spend reserves, fixating on a funding percentage, and lastly, indecision. So let's talk specifically about these different types of reserves. So first of all, hoarding reserves. And this is seen oftentimes. It's very prevalent. And boards get very, very comfortable with the balance sheet item that states how much they have in reserves. They begin to have the opinion that it's their life savings and they don't want to spend it. We commonly recognize hoarding reserves as, but we can't spend that. Those are our savings. Aren't we already underfunded? And it becomes a way that boards get stuck in quicksand because they fixate on a certain balance and they begin to defer what they should be doing. Let's talk about the next type of quicksand, which is depleting reserves. Depleting reserves is the opposite of hoarding reserves. It's where boards get very fast and loose with the spending of their reserve dollars. And that is not planning. Planning is something that boards need to be very careful and strategic about when they deal with their reserve money, because it takes time to build those balances. And it's important for boards not to willy-nilly deplete reserves. Oftentimes, we see this recognized by, but we've got the money. The future is not my problem. Don't care about those people that are going to be moving in 5 years from now. Or, wow, we've got a lot of money. Let's spend it. So remember, depleting reserves is not necessarily good planning, and we need to be very, very careful not to get stuck in that quicksand. The next type of quicksand is really, I guess, one of the worst, and compels us to, as board members, to run the risk of being held negligent, and that's a slippery slope to get into. And that's not collecting or adequately preparing for reserves. And there are some different refrains that we hear. We hear we can't afford to increase our assessments. Why get a reserve study if we're just going to ignore it? I'm only on the board for this year. Why should I pay for someone else's roof? But the homeowners don't want to, but we earn almost no interest. And these are ways of deflecting from the truth, which is a board that simply refuses to prepare adequately and to plan for current and future reserve expenses.
John, can I insert myself here on
Yes,
those
please,
last two
Robert.
points?
Yeah.
Um, who runs the association, the homeowners or the board?
The board of directors is responsible for making these decisions and commissioning these reserve studies.
So they want to be sensitive to the needs of homeowners, or let me say desires, but their focus should be on the needs of the association. Isn't that their primary responsibility?
Yeah, that's right. In fact, there's an old saying that what do members get to do in associations? They vote for good board members and they pay their assessments.
Yeah.
And in a large part, that's really true. The board is charged with making these decisions and making these strategic plans for not only the current members, but also future members of the community.
Yeah, thanks. And we see this in the reserve study field, preparing reserve studies. We have some board members complain about, well, we're not getting any interest, so why should we collect it? I'm doing better on my own. And I just want to insert myself here and say, well, yeah, you may not earn much interest. You may be literally falling behind, but that's a small price to pay for having the funds on hand to be able to execute those projects and maximize those property values, getting to that end objective. But I don't want to take too much time here. We'll get to that a little bit later.
Absolutely, thanks. So let's look at the next type of quicksand, which is apathy. And apathy, as we all know, it's just a horrible thing. It's really not caring. It's a little bit different than not collecting or preparing because we're not making a conscious decision. On the other hand, you could certainly say that being apathetic is not putting the needs of the members and the association in front of the needs of the board. And it's commonly recognized by these different sayings. Isn't that someone else's problem? Or don't we have more important things to discuss? But nobody else funds reserves. One of the challenges of managing the affairs of your association, or if you are a manager managing associations, is putting together good, comprehensive annual calendars and outlining for the board what it is they need to be accomplishing. And talking regularly about reserves is a way to cure that apathy. It's important that we are having conversations on a regular basis about where we are as a community in terms of meeting the goals that we've identified previously. Robert, there's some other types of quicksand that we can fall into. Can you just run us through those here?
Certainly. I think the majority are, as you have stated, kind of on the management side or board member side, but there's a few that are a little bit on the reserve side. And one of those is unsure when to spend reserves. And we hear about that when we hear boards say, well, I don't know. Is this a reserve or an operating expense? I don't want to make a mistake. The expense that doesn't match something on their budget, a project that is $5,500 instead of $5,000, or looking and saying, wow, we need to do this, but it's not in the reserve study. So what do we do? So the question is, what do you do? We don't want you to get stuck analysis paralysis because your association is moving forward to the future and you want to make sure you get there successfully. So when you're unsure how to designate the cash towards a project, whether it's operating or reserves, I want to encourage you to look at the National Reserve Study Standard 4-part test. It says that reserve projects are those that are a common area maintenance responsibility. They have a limited useful life, so they will periodically recur. They have a predictable remaining useful life, so you can see them coming and prepare for them. And they're above a minimum cost. So you don't want to be reserving for mops and buckets and individual sprinkler heads, but you do want to be reserving for groups of projects and significant projects. It might be replacing or modernizing all the furniture in the clubhouse, or doing a clubhouse renovation, carpet, paint, furniture, uh, kitchen remodel, all those kinds of things. So compare your potential expense to the National Reserve Study Standards 4-part test. And again, if you're unsure, by all means, reach out to your reserve study preparer for some insights.
So, Robert, I've got a question about that.
Sure.
Um, in my experience, how much latitude does the board have in the composition of its reserve study? Um, can you maybe explain a little bit what kinds of latitude the board has and how much they can really affect the final product?
Certainly. We are all ears when it comes to listening to our boards, listening to our clients. It's almost like going to the doctor. You don't go to the doctor and say, "Doctor, please figure out what's wrong with me." You say, "I have a sore elbow." And then the doctor will ask a revealing question. Have you been playing a lot of tennis? Have you started a new workout routine? Maybe have you gotten a new desk chair? Those kinds of things. So we work together with the client to put together a great budget plan that will guide the association towards the future. We find a common success formula is the experience and expertise of the reserve study provider, the management insights from the management company, knowing all the numbers, and then the vested interest of the board. They're there, they see things every day. So if we put together the reserve component list and they see, oh, I see 2 tot lots, but not 3, by all means, give us a call. We may have thought that that third tot lot belonged to the neighbor property. So we want to work with you to get a great product for your association. Is that kind of what you were asking
Yeah,
about?
that clarification is really helpful. And does that have to happen at a certain time of the year, or can this be a real organic document and I can give you a call and say, hey, this is what we've discovered and can we get this added?
Yeah. A reserve study is primarily a budget tool, and so it's done in the months leading up to a new fiscal year. But we welcome the calls all through the year as you're actually working with and managing your funds, because you don't want to wait until it's reserve budget time to ask us, well, what should we have done 3 months ago? By all means, it's a live document. It's a budget plan. It's not a budget restriction. So please see it as a guide. Any questions, reach out to your reserve study provider um, all the way throughout the year.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay. And then this one is just a little pet peeve of mine. We have some clients that are focusing on, we want this particular result, or but we don't want to spend that money because it'll drop our percent funded. Or hey, if we take that component out of our reserve study, that'll boost our percent funded. Yay, I'll meet my target. Or I ran on the board promising to get to a certain percent funded target. Well, I just want to encourage you to realize that the whole goal of reserves is having sufficient funds to do your projects on time. Percent funded is just a benchmark along the way. So if you're looking more at percent funded than how are we doing taking care of the property, then that's the wrong target. John, let me, if we were playing tennis, I'd hit the ball back into your cart and tell us about indecision.
Yeah, so this is the last type of quicksand that we want to identify in this presentation. And it's indecision. And I think it's intentional it was left to the end. Indecision, Robert alluded to it earlier, it's kind of the paralysis of analysis. We get bogged down in some of the minutia. We get bogged down in the weeds as boards of directors. We forget about our strategic mission, and we stop making decisions just because we feel like we just can't, or we need more info. And it's commonly recognized by sayings like, we could be wrong. Maybe we shouldn't spend that. Or we go out and do a visual inspection of the pool deck and we say, God, it looks just fine to me. Or we haven't seen any leaks in the roof in quite some time. And so we say, the roof must be in great shape. Or we put it off and say, let's discuss that next month. We don't feel like we have enough info, or let's just put it off, or doggone it, we've already been sitting in this board meeting for 2 hours. Let's put this off for next month. Yeah, time to get home. Or let's let the next board decide. And this is probably one of the worst ones that you hear about indecision. That's the proverbial kick the can down the road. Let's make it somebody else's problem. Board members are fiduciaries. We're going to talk about that. And we can't be kicking the can down the road. So to sum up this section, real important that we take a moment, we try to identify if we are falling into any of these types of quicksand and get back on track. And I love this reference to the Wizard of Oz, right? There was all kinds of things that tried to keep Dorothy and her companions off the yellow brick road. And they needed to get to their destination. And once again, you can read here on the bottom of the slide that our destination is to accumulate sufficient reserves to perform projects on time, not defer maintenance, without special assessments, and maximize property values.
Well, thank you, John. That's a great job of introducing our first topic of identifying quicksand to our audience. If you have any questions, make sure you type them into the Q&A dialog box. Well, let's now transition to the new idea of learning that once you're in quicksand, how to get out.
So this is real interesting. And I think that the first and foremost things that boards need to manage is they need to manage their own expectations of themselves and their own knowledge and their own skills. They need to remember that they're volunteers, that they have duties and responsibilities to their members and their associations, and they need to get help. Reserve planning is complicated, and it takes an experienced manager. It takes credentialed reserve study professionals, maybe CPAs or others, to help get through the process. So it's very important that we ask for help. So as we're getting out of quicksand, we do need to be thinking about the sound business judgment rule. And there are a couple things that are going to drive you as a board. And one of those things should be this concept of sound business judgment. And sound business judgment is your protection as a board member. And it will lead you down the path of your fiduciary responsibilities of duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of inquiry. And we can take a look at that first duty in the sound business judgment rule, or the second one we've got circled on this particular side, which is our duty of loyalty. And we need to be mindful of the fact that our loyalty is to all of our current members and all future members. We have this duty that spans time, especially when it comes to reserve components, because reserve components are linked to time. and they're linked to decay, and they're linked to maintenance. And so this overwhelming sense of loyalty that is part of your fiduciary responsibility will drive you to get out of quicksand. Robert, take us through some of the more strategic parts of this.
Yes, John, as I was listening to you, I realized these are so intrinsically intertwined. First, you have to care about what's going on at the property. You have to be loyal to the needs of the property, and you have that duty of inquiry, like you said earlier. What do I do? How do I get help? Where do I get help? And I think I said it just a couple of moments ago in answer to one of your questions. Reach out to your reserve study provider. So all those three are intertwined, but I want to show a couple of slides that show how you can learn how to get out of quicksand. In your reserve study, you're probably going to get a 30-year expense chart that looks something like this, and you learn from it. You learn what your path to the future looks like. Look at this association. Clearly, they have a big obstacle in this is a 30-year plan, so about 10 years away. Or we can look at another association's plan, and they have a big obstacle in a couple of years. There's scattered expenses through the years, but a big project in just 2 years. So this board needs to be really gearing up for this big project next year. Or it could be this association where they have periodic big projects scattered all through the years. The key here is that they've got a big year. Take a breath, get ready for another big expense year. And you see that these are almost back to back. And so you need to have the reserves set aside in order to overcome these obstacles and get through these projects and have those reserves set aside so you'll be able to accomplish them on time. Or it could be an association like this with nominal projects through the years and then one big one. You don't want to get too complacent, a real big one about 30 years away. So every association's expense profile is going to be different. We call it their expense fingerprint, and it helps you to know what the road to the future looks like. It'll help you in your decision points when you are wondering, okay, what do I do now? And I like this picture again with the Wizard of Oz theme. Dorothy's confronted with a choice. Do I go left? Do I go right? And she's got someone you can see on screen helping to point the path to the future.
So moving on to the sound business judgment rule and what we've been talking in terms of fiduciary duty and responsibility to your associations as board members is the duty of care. And the duty of care overwhelmingly has to do with not only the physical attributes of your association, those common area components that are under your care, but has to really do with all of the compliance mechanism that goes into your managing the affairs of your association. Depending on what state you're from, you're going to have different kinds of requirements, different kinds of things that you must do or that the law compels you to do. And those all go into the duty of care. And that duty of care then will extend directly to how you budget, which is really the focus of our next slide. As we move into making adjustments to contributions based on sound business judgment, based on care, based on loyalty, based on that duty of inquiry. And these are really important. Things change. We need to be caring enough about our associations that we are led by our own duty of inquiry to make sure that we're making the adjustments we should. If you've been making a $100 a month contribution to reserves the last 10 years and you've never changed it, you could probably reasonably assume that you're going to be behind the 8 ball. So budgeting is very important. Understanding how useful lives change, how remaining lives change, how current condition of your components change is all different ways that you can bring experts' opinions to bear on the decisions that you're making. And that's very, very important. So Robert, tell us a little bit more about getting out of quicksand.
Yeah, I want to go on your theme of making adjustments. We find a lot of associations that when they look around, they realize their reserves are not in a strong position. They are in a weak position with respect to reserves. And I want to counsel you and comfort you that you don't have to get out of quicksand instantly. It doesn't have to be done all at once. Slow and smooth is generally recommended to gradually take the association, turn it around. It almost might be compared to a super tanker out in the middle of the ocean. If it's going one direction, it may take a while to turn that thing around. And often the weakly funded associations realize they got there from years or decades of a sequence of maybe poor choices or very optimistic choices. So it doesn't have to be done all at once. It is a very doable project to transition your association gradually and smoothly, but proactively from one that doesn't have sufficient funds to take care of their projects to one that does. Well, I want to thank you, John, for leading us through that section on getting out of quicksand. If you're in quicksand, you certainly need those updates and those insights or those adjustments to be able to get out successfully. Well, now let's transition to being proactive about this topic, avoiding quicksand. Okay, when we're talking about avoiding quicksand, it's all about sustainability. How can I move forward on the path to the future? How can I stay on the straight and narrow so I can be getting to my objective without too many detours? So we talk about sustainability, and that means making contributions that offset deterioration. When you're making reserve contributions that offset the ongoing deterioration, then you're going to get more successfully to your destination. And that means, as we've said before, relying on trusted guides. That could be your experienced manager, that could be your credential reserve study professional. Obviously, on so many other things regarding the association, you need to rely on your accounting and financial professionals or your legal professionals, but do rely on trusted guides. They can keep you on the path. You can see the worn down, the beaten path here. And boy, if I think of getting off this path, I think about getting lost, picking up ticks, whatever the detours and challenges and obstacles are that happen when you are off path. So that's what we want to do here, and that means referring to your reserve study, updating it regularly, and that'll help you identify where you are now and where to go from here.
Robert, with the different, uh, I guess it would be the different requirements in different states, or no requirements at all. Is there a best practice that has to do with updating the reserve study? What would you
Yes.
suggest in terms of best practices?
Yes, best practice is a pretty simple four-part plan, and that's regularly updating your reserve study, collecting reserves as recommended, spending reserves as recommended, and then supplementing that budget report, the reserve study, with a periodic building safety or inspection report by a architect or engineer. Because we're in the budget business, we can guide the association towards taking good care of the building. But again, you get that in a reserve study. It's up to you, the board, to adjust your budget and collect the funds so they are ready to be spent. So you can do the minor maintenance before it becomes big and expensive, and then supplement that budget report, the reserve study, with a periodic building safety or inspection report.
And how often? So, how often should I really be updating? I mean,
Good question. We have clients that fall into generally three categories: clients that update the reserve study annually, clients that update the reserve study every third year, and clients that update the reserve study every fifth year. And those every 3 year and every 5 year clients are generally guided by local laws in their state on that. What we
Mhm.
find is um, the incidence, the frequency of special assessments drops significantly when you go from only updating a reserve study every fifth year to updating it every third year. You get more fresh information. You're able to make more relevant decisions. And then special assessments drop significantly again when you update your reserve study annually. It could be those little inexpensive no site visit updates, but those make a difference. And so, as I said before, consider annual updates, but through the course of the year, when different questions come up, reach out to your community association manager or your reserve study professional to avoid quicksand and make sure you're on track.
Right. And I would add, just as I go to talking about reaching out to your manager, reserve state professional, also that think about the complexity of your association. If you're a single family home association with limited amenities and not much common area, you could probably get away with updating your reserve study on a 5-year basis. If you are a condominium association with lots and lots of common area and lots of maintenance and repair responsibilities, then certainly it may be something that needs to be done on a much more frequent basis. So
Well said. Well
even
said.
though even though you might not have specific laws in your state that govern or compel you, once again, getting back to the sound business judgment rule that we talked about, work with your reserve specialist and consider the complexity. So another way to avoid quicksand then is to reach out to your manager or reserve study professional with periodic questions. We've talked about this um, in other slides as well. And I would also add that it may be important for you to bring in key vendors and service providers to help you with this process.
Good point.
And that's something that you've got to think about depending on what those amenities are. For instance, you might want your pool maintenance service provider to provide some input as to the condition of the filters or the condition of the heaters or the condition of the pool deck and different components. And that's going to help you in your process. You might have your landscape professional provide you with some updates on what they're seeing in terms of condition of irrigation systems or components that have to do with landscaping. And so don't be hesitant. Use those vendors that you use on a regular basis, include them in your process so that you can make sure that you're getting all the information you need, you're meeting the requirements of inquiry and sound business judgment. So with Robert, I think with that, you can begin to summarize out there.
Yeah, no, I like that. You've been talking about the different elements, the different ideas, the adjustments. Don't get too hung up, as I talked about earlier, about getting fixated on percent funded. Don't get too fixated on um, you have to keep the landscaping the way it is. Don't get too fixated on, well, the law says I only have to do a reserve study every X years. Look at what is needed at your association. Look at the path, look at the destination, having sufficient funds to avoid special assessments and maximize property values. That's the target. Well, thank you, John, for all those reminders, for stimulating that discussion. And to our audience, remember, if you have any questions, type them into the Q&A dialog box, and we'll get to those at the end of our session. Well, now, as John has indicated, it's time to transition to a summary of what we've spoken about today. As we've addressed this issue of identifying quicksand, getting out of quicksand, avoiding quicksand, there are just a few ideas we'd like to leave you with. And the first is that the bottom line, quicksand is out there. There's nothing you can do about it. It exists on the trail out in the future of your association. You are on a journey. You don't have a choice about it. The future is coming. Every day brings new challenges, new stories, a little more deterioration about your common areas, changes in pricing. maybe changes in the demographics of your association. Are there more kids, less kids? Um, what happens? Is there a new school that's being built right next to your association, or a shopping center that's causing more traffic? And you're not on your own. Hopefully, we've made that so very clear that as a board, you're chartered with a lot of responsibilities, but you're not on your own. There are landmarks along the way to help you see progress. Those can be your reserve studies, they can be your delinquencies. They can be the health of your landscaping. Those can be your property values. How are your property values doing in the most recent sale? Look at what that last 2 bedrooms sold for, things like that. So keep your eyes open, look around, follow your guides, and you'll reach your objective just fine. It's a great journey. Again, you're not on your own, and we so much want to help as a couple of guides here help you along that way. And speaking of being guides, I want to give John just a moment to talk about how his company works to help community associations and their leaders and help them get successfully into the future.
Thank you, Robert. Really appreciate the opportunity. Um, so coming out of a career in community management, I realized that in a lot of cases, boards of directors, about the best way I can put it is they simply get stuck. And association consulting group has really dedicated itself to helping boards get unstuck. It's not that boards don't necessarily have the conviction or the commitment to do the right thing for their associations. It's oftentimes that they just simply don't know how to get there. And so we provide what I would call trusted advisor services, general consulting, financial consulting, educational seminars, training, do some legal work as well and expert testimony. And we also connect professional management with community associations in terms of providing search services. So thank you very much, Robert, for allowing me to just talk briefly about what I do. You can find us on the web at myassociationadvisor.com, and don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And while you may be physically in Arizona, we're talking about human behavior and board behavior, and those issues are consistent and constant all across the country.
Amen.
Yes. Well, and on behalf of Association Reserves, I want to thank you for joining us today. We're a National Reserve Day provider here to assist you and in so many different ways. One thing that is new and available this year is we published a book about reserve studies. You can get that directly from Amazon.com. It's a simple read. It's a great resource for your bookshelf or for your management company. And we also have another great resource that we've been rolling out on a large level this year. It's our UPlanet software. It's an online reserve calculator. It comes free with your completed reserve study and it allows you to interact with your reserve plan. It's actually revolutionary because you used to just get your reserve study and look at it and stare at it. And now with UPlanet, you can literally start playing with the numbers and poke it and see how it moves. And we will have this webinar recorded for future replay, and you can search for our videos on reservestudy.com, our website, or you can go straight to YouTube. When you find us, subscribe to our channel and give those videos a like. And so in summary, we hope that we've provided some great content for you today. If you sign up for our email list, if you go to any page at our website, reservestudy.com, scroll to the bottom, you'll get notified of our upcoming webinars and get the insights. Again, this is free and we're here to help you achieve the future. So today is avoiding the reserves quicksand. The next two on the list will be aging condos, how to deal successfully specifically with the issues of aging condos. And we'll do that in two different parts. So that brings us to the end of today's prepared material. And at this point in time, we'll transition and I'll turn the microphone over to Paige, who will coordinate our Q&A time together. Paige.